everyone, I'm Michelle with Designs by JuJu, and in today's video tutorial, we're going to be making the In the Hoop gingerbread bag with dolls. This project comes in two sizes, a 6x10 and a 7x12. In today's video tutorial, I will be stitching the 6x10. This project is made in 8 hoopings and requires a sewing machine for some finishing work. There are also 2 additional bonus files included within your purchase, a buttonhole and a bonus bag strap feature. Not only will we be making the gingerbread bag in today's tutorial, but we will also be making the gingerbread stuffies that are included with your purchase. Let's get started. For the In the Hoop gingerbread bag with dolls, you will need the following supplies. Fabric cut according to the supply list listed within the PDF. I'm using the Gingerbread Kisses and the POParazzi lines, both from Riley Blake Designs. I will also be using some minky fabric to make my gingerbread dolls. You will need 2 types of stabilizer, no-show mesh cutaway stabilizer for the bag and its panels, and a tearaway stabilizer for the dolls. Batting, scissors, SF101 fused to the background fabric for your bag, embroidery thread, I prefer Floriani for all of my embroidery work, and some finishing supplies, including webbing for your bag handle, some peel and stick fabric fuse, or you can use some hand stitching or a sewing machine to close the opening on your bag, magnetic snaps, button, Velcro, or another type of closure for your purse, and then some finishing supplies for the gingerbread dolls, including needle and thread and some polyfill stuffing. Let's get stitching. All right, we are over at my embroidery machine, and we're going to first start by stitching the gingerbread dolls for this project. So I already have my tearaway stabilizer hooped onto my 5x7 hoop. The first stitches that we're going to do are for the arms for our gingerbread man, and so we can actually use a 5x7 hoop for this step. I already have my hoop loaded onto my machine, and I'm ready to run the first stitch, which is going to be the placement line for my fabric. Next, I'm going to take my fabric and I'm going to lay it directly on top of those placement stitches, making sure that all of the sides are covered. I'm going to run the tack down to secure my fabric in place. Since I'm using a fabric with a nap, this is some minky fabric for my gingerbread, I'm going to place some water-soluble topper on top of my fabric. If you're using a cotton or a fabric that does not have a nap, you can actually skip this step. But the water-soluble topper helps to contain the fibers of your fabric so that it doesn't distort your stitches as it's stitching. Next, I'm going to run the decorative stitches for the gingerbread man's hands. Once those stitches are complete, I'm going to remove the water-soluble topper, and it should just tear away cleanly. If there's any residual pieces left over, you can remove those with a Q-tip and a little bit of water. Next, I am going to place my fabric for my gingerbread hands. This will be on the back side of the gingerbread hands, and I'm going to place it right side facing down. So again, I'm using some minky, so the soft side of the minky is going to be facing down, and I'm going to run the final stitch, which is going to tack down my back fabric. And the gingerbread hands are complete. So let's take this over to my work table and we'll finish this step. Now that the gingerbread hands are stitched, we're ready to remove them from our hoop. And I'm going to tear away all of this excess stabilizer. This is why you want to use a tearaway stabilizer, so that it removes cleanly and you don't have any excess bulk inside your gingerbread stuffy. Next, using a pair of scissors, I am going to trim away the excess minky along the sides and the top portion of the hands. But down along the opening, I am going to leave the fabric long, so don't trim this part where the opening is. Repeat this for the other hand. Next, using your turning tool, I'm going to flip the hand through the opening along the bottom and gently poke out any of the corners to give it a nice rounded edge. And as you can see, Minky's pretty messy. I've got some loose fabric debris flying around. And there we go. So these two hands are completed stitching. Now I need to grab some polyfill stuffing, and I am going to place some of this stuffing inside each of the hands. You don't want to overstuff them, but you do want to have a little bit of polyfill so that it gives your gingerbread arms and hands a little bit of dimension for your stuffy. So once you have an amount that you like, you can set these two gingerbread hands off to the side and we'll be ready to stitch the body next. We are back over at my embroidery machine, and I have my 6x10 hoop loaded onto my machine with my tearaway stabilizer, and I'm ready to go ahead and stitch out the gingerbread boy body. So I already have it loaded onto my machine. I'm ready to run the first stitch, which is going to be the placement line for my background fabric. Next, I am going to place my Minky fabric directly on top of the placement stitches. And if you are using a Minky like me, you want to pay attention to the way in which the nap lays. All right, so once you have your Minky laid down, you're ready to run the tack down stitch to secure that fabric in place. The next few stitches are the decorative and icing stitches. I'm going to run those stitches off camera, but before I do that, I do again want to place my water-soluble topper directly on top of my Minky just to help contain the fibers of the nap. And then I'm going to run those stitches. When my decorative stitches are complete, we'll check back in to see what this looks like. All of my decorative stitches are complete, and I've removed my water-soluble topper. So now I am ready to run the next stitch, which is going to be the placement lines for my arms. The placement stitch is stitched right along here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my first arm here, and I am going to place it so that the right side faces down. I want to line up this stitch right here just outside of the placement stitch, so that those stitches will not be seen when I flip my gingerbread man here in a bit. Okay, so I'm going to place the hand, the arm. Like I said, I just want to make sure that these stitches right here are outside of the body just a little bit. You don't want to go too far, otherwise your arm will be short. And I am going to take a piece of medical tape here, and I'm going to place it right on top of that hand, like so. I'm going to run the tack down stitches to secure those arms in place. If you have the capability to raise the embroidery foot height for your machine, that is a good idea. I would also recommend slowing down your embroidery machine. All right, so the final step that we are ready for is to add our backing fabric on. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this tape. And this is why I love medical tape, because look how cleanly it removes. It doesn't gunk up the needle. It didn't damage the stitches in any way. And it just pulls right away so easily. All right, so I'm going to make sure that these hands are laying nice and flat. And again, I'm going to take my Minky fabric, pay attention to the nap, and I'm going to place it just on top of my gingerbread, face down, right side facing down. And I'm going to run the final stitch, which is going to tack down the back of our fabric for our gingerbread stuffy. And our gingerbread body is complete. Let's head over to the work table and we'll finish our gingerbread man. We are over here at the work table, and the first thing I'm going to do is remove my gingerbread from my hoop, and then I am going to tear away all of this excess stabilizer. You'll also want to tear away as much of this inner portion that you can, that way you don't have any crinkly sound inside of your stuffy. All right, I've got my excess stabilizer removed, so now I am ready to cut around the outside of my stuffy. I do want to be cautious as I'm trimming. Find the opening and leave excess fabric there. You do not want to cut close to that opening because you want to be able to have something that you can hand stitch to close here in a bit. I'm going to cut around the remaining stuffy, leaving about 1/4 inch excess. Next, I am going to flip my gingerbread stuffy through the opening on the side. Next, you can use a turning tool to help gently poke out any of these corners like so. And there's our body. If you do any kind of minky work, you need one of these little vacuums because it is a huge time saver and it cleans up all this mess. Next, it is time to stuff our little gingerbread boy. So I'm going to again use some polyfill stuffing, and I'm going to place that stuffing inside the opening at the side. Once your stuffy is nice and fluffy, you're ready to tuck in all of this excess fabric here on the side. Now, here's my excess fabric from the arm. So I want to make sure I tuck that into the opening. And I also want to tuck in my excess fabric here. I'm going to cut it a little bit shorter because I don't need that much fabric. So I'm going to tuck it in to the opening on the side like so. And then I am going to hand stitch closed this opening on the side using some needle and thread. Again, make sure you have all of this arm fabric tucked in as well. You don't want any pieces hanging out of the side. And my gingerbread stuffy is complete. You will repeat these exact same steps for the girl gingerbread stuffy. The only variation that she has that's a little bit different is she actually has a little applique bow on the top of her head. And you can reference the PDF instructions included with your purchase if you need detailed step-by-step pictures for how to do that. All right, now we're ready to assemble our bag. We are over at my embroidery machine, and I already have my no-show mesh cutaway stabilizer hooped onto my 6x10 hoop, and we are going to stitch the first panel, which is going to be the middle back panel. So the first stitch that I'm going to run is going to be the placement line for my batting. Next, I am going to place my batting directly on top of the placement stitches, making sure that all of the stitches are completely covered, and I'm going to run the tack down to secure my batting in place. Next, I'm going to remove my hoop from my machine, and I'm going to trim away all of this excess batting, making sure not to trim any of those tack down stitches. Now that I have my excess batting trimmed away, I'm ready to run the next stitch, which is going to be the placement line for my bottom background fabric. Next, I'm going to place my bottom background fabric on top of those placement lines, and you'll want at least a 1/2 inch seam allowance along the sides and the bottom so that when you assemble your bag, you have something to stitch to. I'm going to trim away the excess up here at the top. I have already fused SF101 to the back of my background fabric, and so I'm ready to run my tack down stitch to secure this fabric in place. Next, I'm going to remove my hoop and trim away the excess fabric right here along the top. I've just trimmed away the excess fabric right along the top. All right, so the next stitch is going to be a decorative quilting motif that's going to stitch along the entire bottom fabric here. So I'm going to stitch that off camera, and then we'll check back in once it's complete. The decorative quilting motif has just stitched onto my background fabric and it is adorable. It's these cute little peppermints all throughout. So now I'm ready to get my top background fabric stitched down. So the first stitch is going to be the placement line for my top fabric. It is kind of hard to see with the thread color I chose here, but right below my red tack down line, there is a second stitch line, and that is the line that I'm going to use to line up my fabric for my top border fabric. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my top border fabric, whatever I've chosen, and I'm going to flip it so that it is face down on my fabric here. So it's face down, right sides together. And I am going to line it parallel to that placement line, and I'm actually going to have it overhang about 1/4 to 1/2 of an inch up. I want to make sure that I have plenty of fabric so that it'll catch, and you can see where your embroidery foot's at and just position that fabric about 1/4 of an inch up. It's going to stitch a straight line directly across to tack down this fabric. Okay, once your fabric is tacked down, now you're going to flip this fabric up and give that seam a good press. And now we're going to run the tack down to secure the remaining border fabric in place. We call this the flip and stitch method. The next couple of stitches are all some applique stitches. If you have never done applique work before, make sure to check the description box below where I'll have a few helpful links for you to check out. I am going to run my applique stitches off camera and then we'll check back in once that's complete. Now that my applique pieces are tacked down, I am ready to finish this panel. I'm going to be stitching all of the satin and decorative stitches off camera. We'll check back in once the remaining stitches are complete and we'll be ready to finish this panel. My middle back panel has just completed stitching, so I went ahead and removed my hoop from my machine, and now I'm going to unhoop my panel. Next, I am going to trim away the excess stabilizer and the excess fabric. So I'm just going to use my trimmer by George to fold this fabric out of the way and trim away all of the excess stabilizer. Next, I'm going to leave a 1/2 inch seam allowance around the entire panel. My first panel is complete. I'm going to repeat these exact same steps for the remaining front and back panels. You should have 6 total panels for your purse when it's complete. I'm also going to repeat these exact same steps for my top flap, which has 2 hoopings. It has a middle section and then 2 side pieces, all stitched the exact same way as these panels. All right, once my panels are stitched, we'll check back in and we'll be ready to finish assembling our bag. Once you have completed stitching all of your panels, you should have 6 panels, 3 for the front and 3 for the back of the bag, and then 1 large top flap and 2 side pieces. Next, we are going to start with the top flap first. And I am going to lay my pieces out that are needed, like so. You will want to pay attention to the side pieces and the direction in which the scallops line up. You'll want the slants at the sides. If you try to line it up this way, your bag flap, you can see, goes up at an angle on this top part. So make sure that you have your straight edge lined up with your straight edge, like so. It should go flat across the top. Okay, so we're going to start with the first 2 pieces in our panel here. And I am going to take the first piece of this top flap and I am going to flip it so that right sides are together on top of the larger front flap. Next, I am going to either take some pins or some clips, and I am going to line up this outermost tack down stitch here. If you remember, when we stitched this, we had the tack down and placement for our batting, and then we have the tack down and placement for our fabric. So we're lining up this outermost stitch line, which is the fabric tack down. And you can see I'm just going to line it up like so from the outside. You can also create a little anchor point using a sewing pin. If you poke through one corner and line it up, that will help you to line up your pieces, and it creates a little anchor point so that you can line it up a little bit here, like so. Okay, and then just line up the remaining stitches. Pay attention to where that frosting is, that icing, where it lands. You'll want to make sure that that's lined up. And I prefer clips, but some people like sewing pins as well. So you can choose whatever you prefer. And if you have a 1/2 inch border all the way around your pieces when you trimmed them, that will also help you because you can see where they line up. They should line up pretty close. Take your time on this step. It's tedious. Okay, so then you can go ahead and do this side if you want to, if you think that you can keep this one secure. Otherwise, you can take this one over to your sewing machine. And again, you're going to stitch just inside this outermost tack down stitch. Don't go outside of it and don't go inside the innermost. Otherwise, your pieces won't fit together right. You need to go just inside this outermost tack down line and run a stitch all the way across. If you have done this step correctly, you should no longer see these outermost tack down stitches within this seam line. Now we're going to repeat this exact same steps with our other flat piece. Again, we're going to flip it so right sides are together, pin and clip along the outermost tack down lines and stitched in place. Now that my entire top flap is stitched together into one piece and I've pressed open my seams, I'm ready to set this off to the side, and I'm going to go back to my front and back panels. Now that I have my top flap stitched together, I'm ready to move on to my front panel. So this will be the front of my bag, and I already have my panels laid out. I have my door panel with my Merry Christmas in the middle, and then I have my 2 windows on the sides. Pay attention to the direction of the candy canes because they do point out a little bit different. You also want to make sure that this Merry Christmas panel is in the middle because it is slightly larger than these 2 side panels. We're going to repeat the exact same steps that we did on the top flap for the front and back panels. Again, starting with the left panel, flipping it on top, right sides together, lining up the outermost stitches, using pins or clips, and running a stitch just inside the outermost tack down line. As you go to pin and clip these 2 panels, you do want to make sure that as you're lining up these outermost tack down stitches, you're paying close attention to where the candy cane striping lines up and where this top piece lines up. If you go to line this up and it's slightly off, it's going to look very strange from your front of your bag when you go to unfold it. So just pay close attention. I like to start in that section with the candy cane striping, and then I like to clip it in place, and then I make sure that my top border up here is also lined up. Now that I have my first 2 panels clipped in place, I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine and again stitch just inside that outermost tack down line. I have my first 2 panels stitched together, and as you can see, my border is lined up nicely as well as my peppermint trim here. If I flip to the back, I have pressed open my seams. You will definitely want to do that. So now I'm ready to add the final panel to my front of my bag. And I'm going to, again, follow the exact same steps. I'm going to take this panel, flip it right sides together, line up the outermost tack down lines, and pin and clip in place, then stitch right inside the outermost tack down lines. And now the front of my bag is complete. So I have all 3 panels stitched together and my seams pressed open on the back. I am going to repeat these exact same steps for the remaining 3 panels for the back of my bag. Again, make sure that you follow the layout that's included within your PDF. You again have your middle panel and your 2 side panels. Pay attention to the directionality, and this one needs to stay in the middle because it is slightly larger. All right, so I'm going to stitch those same steps off camera, and then we'll check back in once my back bag panel is complete. And now my back panel is complete. I'm going to set my front and my back panels off to the side, and we're going to be ready to start adding our lining. Now we are ready to start adding our lining. I already have my front flap panel here in front of me, and I'm first going to start by cutting a piece of lining fabric that is slightly larger than my front flap. You can reference the cut chart included within your PDF download for specific sizing measurements. What I am going to do, and this next step is completely optional, but I want to make sure that my flap has a little bit more structure to it. So I am going to add a piece of cutaway stabilizer. This is just cutaway stabilizer. And I am going to just spray a little bit of spray adhesive onto my cutaway stabilizer and fuse my lining fabric to that. That will just get this liner piece a little bit more structure. There are other products you could apply to your liner fabric to make it a little bit stiffer, but this is just easy and quick, and I have it right here on hand. So I'm going to spray this adhesive on and go ahead and fuse this to my liner fabric. Now that I have that stabilizer fused to my liner fabric, I'm ready to take my front flap, and I am going to position it so right sides are together, like so. Next, using my pins, I am going to pin along the outermost edge of my flap to secure the front flap to my liner fabric. Next, I am going to take my liner and my flap over to my sewing machine, and I am going to again stitch just inside that outermost tack down line around the sides, bottom scallop, and other side. I am not going to put any stitches along the top because this opening will be where I will flip this flap right side facing out. Once the panel is stitched to the lining, it's time to remove the pins, and using a ruler, I am going to trim a 1/4 inch seam allowance around the sides and bottoms of the top flap. Do not trim along the top portion. Also, you will want to trim these angles over here. You will want to trim these little corners at an angle. Okay, so here's what I'm left with. I trimmed a 1/4 inch seam allowance along the sides and the bottom, and then I also trimmed these corners at an angle. So now I am ready to use my turning tool and flip this top flap through so it is right side facing out. Here's what we're left with. So the final step for our panel is I am going to trim some of this excess fabric away, and I'm going to leave a 1/2 inch seam allowance at the top and just trim away that excess liner and stabilizer. And here's what we're left with. It looks so cute. So again, if you've done this step correctly, you should still have an opening along the top. I am going to set this top flap off to the side, and then we're going to get our liner ready for the front and back of our bag. Now that I have my top flap complete, I'm ready to work on the lining for the front and back pieces of my bag. I have just cut 2 pieces of liner fabric that are exactly the same size as my front and back panels. And I am going to take these 2 pieces of fabric and I am going to position them so they are right sides together. Next, I am going to use my sewing pins, and I am going to pin all the way around the entire liner, leaving a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I am going to pin along the sides, the bottom, and the remaining side. I am not going to pin along the top. I am also going to leave a 5 to 6 inch opening along the bottom. When we go to add our liner to our front and back panels, this opening at the bottom will be where we flip our bag through at the final stages. Next, I am going to take my liner over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to stitch a 1/2 inch seam allowance along the sides, bottom over to the opening, on the other side of the opening, and along the other side. My liner fabric is stitched together, and as you can see, I have my 1/2 inch seam allowance on the sides, and along the bottom, I left an opening here at the bottom, and then I trimmed my corners here on the sides. I did leave the top completely open. Again, you need to make sure that you do that. All right, I'm going to set this off to the side, and now we're going to work with our top flap again. This next step is completely optional, but I did want to show you the steps to do that. So as we prepare to finish our top flap, you will notice that there is a space here in the center. This is for you to add either a buttonhole or a magnetic snap or some other type of a closure for your purse. I am going to be showing you very quickly how you can add the buttonhole feature to this. There is a buttonhole included within your downloads from Designs by JuJu. It's completely optional whether or not you want to use it, but it is very quick and easy. You will want to use a tearaway stabilizer if you're adding the buttonhole. And I've just got it hooped in my 5x7 hoop. I'm going to go put this on my machine and run the first stitch, which is going to be the placement line for my top flap. So I just ran the placement line for my top flap, and as you can see, it matches that same scallop design. Now I am going to take my scalloped buttonhole here, and I am going to line it up the best that I possibly can onto this placement line. This is going to take a little bit of finagling and some careful placement. Once you have it positioned within your hoop, I'm going to place some tape to hold down that flap the best that I can. And then I'm going to place this hoop back onto my machine to run the buttonhole stitch. Okay, now that I have my buttonhole complete, I'm just going to remove this excess tape. And this should tear right away, just like that, super easy. And then using a seam ripper, I'm just going to carefully open my buttonhole. And there we go. We've got our simple little buttonhole. Now that I have the buttonhole on my flap, we're ready to move on to the next step, which is going to be to stitch our flap to our back panel. Make sure that you have the back panel of your bag. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to take my flap and I am going to position it so the right side is facing down. Then I am going to line up the outermost stitch lines again with the outermost stitch lines of my back panel. You will want to center it in the middle between the back panels like so. Once you have the top flap secured to the back of your back panel, you're going to take it over to your sewing machine. And again, we're going to stitch just inside that outermost tack down line to secure our flap to our back bag panel. I've just stitched just inside that outermost tack down. So when I go to unfold it, you can see my flap is now secured to my back bag panel. Now we are ready to work on the front of our panel. It is time to go ahead and stitch our strap. There are multiple ways that you can add a strap to your bag. You can sew in a strap using some webbing, and to do that, you would just line it up, cut the length of webbing you want, and stitch it on each side like so. Or you can do the method which I'm going to show you, which involves D-rings and a pre-made or store-bought strap. Now, there is a really fun bonus file included with your purchase that allows you to make this adorable gingerbread bag strap add-on, which is what I did. So if you want to make this, make sure to reference the PDF included with your purchase that gives you the step-by-step instructions for how to do this. It is so easy, but I have attached it to the end of my adjustable strap. So I have one end that has this gingerbread house and then the other end which allows me to make my strap adjustable. So I'm going to put this strap off to the side. You could also use a pre-made strap, or you could just make a strap with two ends like this and not adjustable. Totally your choice. Since I am using my adjustable strap, I need to add some D-rings to my bag. So I already have my D-rings here and some webbing cut. And I am going to go ahead and pin these D-ring and webbing pieces onto my bag panel. Once I have my webbing and D-rings pinned to my front panel, I'm going to take these over to my sewing machine and I'm going to stitch just outside that outermost tack down line so that you don't see those stitches when I assemble my bag. Now it is time to stitch together my front panel and my back panel. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to make sure that this top flap is out of the way, and I am going to position my front panel on top of my back panel. I am going to again line up the outermost tack down stitches and pin or clip in place. If you have added D-rings, you want to make sure that those D-rings are tucked inside and not hanging out of the outer stitch path. If you are choosing to add a sew-in strap, again, make sure that all of that strapping is inside within these outermost tack down stitches. If it's outside, it's going to get cut off when we trim our bag. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and line up the stitches and pin and clip in place. Now that my front and back panels are clipped in place, I am going to take this over to my sewing machine and again stitch just inside the outermost tack down line along the side, bottom, and remaining side. Make sure this top flap is pulled out of the way and you will not do any stitching along the top. Now that I have the front panel and back panel stitched together, you can see I have my opening here at the top. I am going to take this flap and tuck it inside between the front and back panel like so. So here's my front flap. Next, I am going to take my liner fabric and I am going to turn it so the right side is facing out. Next, I am going to take my liner fabric and I am going to tuck it inside of the opening of the bag. Again, make sure that your top flap stays inside between the panels. I'm going to take this liner fabric and I am going to clip all the way around the entire edge of the bag. Now that I have my liner clipped all the way around the entire inside of the bag, you can see that the wrong side is facing out, as well as the wrong side of the bag is facing out. You do not want to see the right side of the liner or the right side of the bag. All right, so now I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine, and again, I'm going to stitch just inside that outermost tack down line all the way around the entire opening of the bag. Now that I have my liner stitched to my bag, I'm ready to flip my bag through the opening that's in the bottom of our liner. Once you have your bag flipped through this opening in the liner, it's time to close your liner. So here's my liner piece, and I just have it pulled out from inside the opening so that I can stitch it closed. You can either hand stitch, you can use a sewing machine, or you can use some other type of adhesive to close this opening within your liner. I have my opening stitched closed, and so now I am ready to take my liner and I am going to push it back down into the inside of the bag. And you can use a turning tool to help you get the corners pushed back in to the right spot. Once you have your liner tucked back inside of your bag, this is what it should look like. So I just gave my bag a good press. So here's my front, here's my back, and here's my top flap. So now I am ready to add my button. Remember, I put my buttonhole here. I'm ready to go ahead and add my button in the appropriate location that I want it. I went ahead and stitched my buttonhole right below my Merry Christmas on this border area. Again, yours may be different depending how your flap lines up with the rest of your bag. But look how cute. Oh my goodness, this is absolutely precious. Okay, so the final step is to add your bag strap. Remember, you can either make one or you can purchase one pre-made, or if you did your bag strap where you sewed it in, yours is already peeking through. So here is our completed bag. This is so cute. Oh my goodness, how adorable. And of course, this bag is not complete without its little gingerbread stuffies, and these can tuck right on in here. And how cute is that? Just a reminder that there are many other customizations you can do on this bag. I did show you how to do the buttonhole, but you can use a cam snap, you could use a magnetic snap. There are tons of other ways you could close your bag. You could even use Velcro, or you don't have to add the flap at all. If you just want an open bag, you would just skip this flap and the steps that go along with that. So this bag has so many customization options that make it truly one of a kind and allow you to personalize it for a special someone in your life. We just completed stitching the In the Hoop gingerbread bag and it turned out so cute. If you remember, I stitched the 6x10 size on camera, but I also have the 7x12 size for a size comparison. As you can see, both bags are absolutely adorable. For our 6x10 size, we stitched our panels as well as our flap using our embroidery machine. We then assembled using the sewing machine at the end. I also showed you how you can use the buttonhole feature to add a simple and easy closure to your bag. There are a variety of other closures you could use, including a magnetic snap, Velcro, cam snap, or other. In addition to our bag, you also receive these adorable gingerbread stuffies. These cuties fit perfectly inside your bag and are oh so cute. These also come in the 6x10 size as well as a 7x11 size. In addition to the bonus buttonhole design, there is also a bag strap accent that is included with your purchase. If you're looking for step-by-step instructions for how to make this, make sure to reference your PDF included within your purchase. I just love the whimsical and fun gingerbread stitching included within this bag. It is so adorable, and I know it is going to be a favorite this upcoming holiday season. I hope you have enjoyed today's tutorial for the In the Hoop gingerbread bag and dolls. Make sure to check the description box below for additional helpful links. Also, make sure to join the Designs by JuJu Blessings Facebook group for more tips, tricks, and inspiration. We hope to see you soon. Don't forget to subscribe. Happy stitching!